There was actually a panel debate between Dave Smith, Prager, the guy who started PragerU, Batya, who you've seen before. They're on the Zionist side, of course. And Cenk Uygur. I did not think I would have to talk about Cenk again since I talked about him the other day. But this debate was really, it's something else. We're going to talk about a part of this. It's Zero Hedge presents the Israel-Iran-Palestine debate, and Sagar and Jetty is actually moderating this debate. So really interesting. Let's dive into this. There's some funny moments. We got to get into it.
But before we get started, and I introduce everybody, we've got a quick word from our sponsor. Dave Smith, why don't you take it away?
Oh, thank you very much. Well, if you are tired of all the virtue signaling when you're simply trying to buy products, I know I am. Progressive corporate America continues to push messaging that further alienates conservative Americans, all while eroding the future of the American dream. It's prominent all over the country. Retailers selling tuck-friendly bathing suits to children, corporations pressuring their employees to conform to woke DEI policies, banks canceling customers, users being deplatformed by big tech or gender ideology being forced on you. Thankfully, we don't have to fund these companies any longer. With our hard-earned dollars with Public Square, we now have a solution. It's simple. Stop spending your money at companies that hate you and shift your dollars to companies who love truth and our country, our Constitution, at publicsquare.com.
So that's the company that actually sponsored this debate. I'm just going to go forward a little bit. Sorry, I forgot about that part.
And so I think with that, I'm going to offer some opening statements. I'll give everybody, let's say, a couple of minutes, like 3 minutes or so. And so with that, I think we should go ahead and start. We'll start with you, Dennis. Dennis Prager is the founder of Prager University and the host of the Dennis Prager radio show. On the topic, is Israel's invasion of Gaza morally justified? Let's start there, which is the stated topic. Go ahead, sir.
So thank you very much. Thank you all who are watching. By the way, which is my camera? Because I want to talk to the audience.
Go ahead. I think it's.
Is that it over there? Hi, everybody.
All right.
Thank you for having me. The dilemma in the Middle East has always been the same from the beginning of Israel's creation in 1948, and that is that its neighbors do not want there to be a Jewish state in their midst. That is the entire problem. One side, as I have put it all of my life, one side wants the other side dead. And in case you were in doubt about it, October 7th should have made that clear.
Now, Professor Morandi has already cleared this up and made it very clear. It's not that, again, this guy is generalizing. It's not that they want Jewish people dead. It's more so that they want the apartheid regime to cease to exist. Got to debunk here.
If you really want to have a serious moral debate, and one should, and you're not already committed to the anti-Israel side, I have a question. And I think this question more or less clarifies everything. If Israel announced, we are disarming and we will fight no longer, what would happen? If the Palestinians said, we are disarming and we will fight no longer, what would happen? If you are intellectually honest, you know the answer to the question. The day after Israel announced it disarmed, you would have an October 7th of the entire population of Israel. There would be finally an actual genocide, not the false accusation of Israeli genocide in Gaza.
This guy is disgusting. So this is the Prager guy. I do just want to jump in here for a second. And just a reminder, I think Prager is some religious, I think it's like a Christian type of thing, because I've seen Prager ads before. So if that is the case, then he most likely might be a Christian Zionist. I don't know for sure, but it seems like he might be heading down that lane, right? Just listening to his rhetoric. And if he is a Christian Zionist, and I would argue there are more of them in this country than Jewish Zionists, then this is exactly what he wants to happen. Because you have to remember what they're taught, especially in reference to the Bible, is that you need to actually have the Jewish people in the location that they're in right now in order for the second coming of Jesus Christ. So in order for the Christian Zionists to feel that the prophecy that has been told to them has been fulfilled, what is happening with Israel needs to happen. So you have to understand that, so that you understand why he has the talking points that he has.
If the Palestinians announce that the next day, or perhaps the next week, there would be peace. This is the only time, as the little excerpt I saw when I spoke at Oxford and debated this issue, this is the only case in modern history where people believe the democracy, the free state, the state with an opposition press, an opposition party, civil rights for all its citizens, including its 2 million Arab citizens, the peace-loving state, the democracy, is the aggressor, and the police state that tortures its opponents, they're the good guys. That is how inverted it is. I have a theory as to why everything is inverted, and I believe it is because it is the one Jewish state in the world. There are 22 Arab states, there are 52 Muslim states, there are 200 states around about that number all over the world. Only one is targeted for extinction. There is no other state targeted for extinction.
So first of all, like, again, he's lying. He's clearly lying. Who is in power? The Palestinian people are not in power. Israel is the one that is in power. They are the ones that have been the aggressor. Gaza does not have a military. Like, you kidding me? Are you kidding me? They're the ones pulling people out of their homes in the West Bank. And this guy wants to sit here and pretend like none of these things are happening. He wants to pretend like Israel isn't doing any of these things, and then wants to use religion as an excuse for it.
Only the one Jewish state the size of New Jersey. And so that is the issue. One side wants the other side dead, and it has been true since 1948.
All right, Dennis, thank you very much. Cenk, why don't we go to you, founder of the Young Turks? Go ahead.
Yeah. So first of all, we should clarify the question, because if we're saying, hey, was Israel right to go in the first place after October 7th? I say yes, but it depends on how. And how long do you stay? How do you conduct affairs, etc. If we're talking about how Israel has conducted this war and whether they should still be in there, that's a hard no. It's not even close. It's been absolutely atrocious what they've done. And not only has it killed over 33,000 Palestinians, with probably a lot more than that inside the rubble, 76,000 wounded, 1.1 million people starving. If you think that that is good for Israel, I think that you ought to have a sanity check. So not only is it devastating for the Palestinians, potentially devastating for the world, as Netanyahu now agitates for a broader war with Iran engulfing the entire Middle East, which will be catastrophic for America and the world. But for Israel itself, if you want a safe haven for Jews, you must stop the occupation. 75 long, brutal years. So it's one thing to say, hey, theoretically, Hamas would do this. And by the way, I'm then going to say all Palestinians would do that, or all Muslims would do that. That's a dangerous area to go to, right? It's another thing to say, yes, well, while they theoretically don't want our state to exist, we're actually preventing their state from existing. I mean, it's such an ironic argument. Hey, we prevented their state for 75 long years. We prevented them from having freedom for 75 long years. We've brutalized them in every possible way. We've humiliated them in every possible way. Number one, we can't believe they're fighting back. Are you serious? We'll talk a lot about this in the debate. But so...
Let me pause here for just a second, because I want to get you guys' opinion about this. It was really interesting to me that Cenk Uygur was a part of this panel debate. I was kind of trying to figure out why they didn't have people a part of this discussion that have actually been to Gaza. Like, why didn't they have, and someone mentioned it in the chat, thank you for reminding me, why didn't they have Norm Finkelstein and Max Blumenthal be a part of this debate? Because they've been to Gaza. I don't think Cenk has been to Gaza, but they've been to Gaza. Think about that for a second.
Would people have been surprised if Jews fought back against the Germans during World War II? Would that have been terrorism? Is that what it would have been? That's outrageous to say that. Of course, Jews should have been able to fight back against the Germans. Any occupied people should be able to fight back. We can go to Armenians fighting back against the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so those are my original people. I'm Turkish descent. And if you said, oh, the Armenians, how dare they? They should have loved the Turks. And they should have said the Turks are the greatest people on earth. And they should have been occupied and accepted their occupation. I can't.
Or slave revolts as well. I'm glad that you acknowledged that, Cenk. I'm glad that you, I'm glad he acknowledged that, because that was, the Armenian genocide as well. But the reality is, you got to think about this for a second. What about the slave revolts that have happened? Should those be, that's the other thing. Like, do you think Nat Turner was wrong? You see, they don't like it when you use those examples, because then it implies that Israel was imprisoning people, because they were.
I can't believe they fought back. And you know what? When the Turks moved them and killed them, they were just defending themselves. They have a right to defend themselves. Guys, if you're in that camp, I don't think you understand how biased you sound, and how it does not sound to anyone outside of your camp that you're in a rational world. So if you want Israel to be safe, you must end the occupation. It is not optional. So is the goal here to say, as Netanyahu is clearly saying now, he's saying, I do not want a two-state solution. Permanent occupation means permanent war, permanent terrorism, and a disaster for Israel, let alone the Palestinians.
Got it. Batya, why don't you go ahead? Batya Ungar-Sargon, she is opinion editor at Newsweek, and she's the author of Second Class, How the Elites Betrayed America's Working Men and Women, which we have a copy of on the desk right over there. She was so kind to give us one. Go ahead, Batya. You can go ahead and start.
Thank you so
So she's also a Zionist, by the way. I've seen her multiple times.
much for having me. I'm so honored to be here with this panel. Are we all in agreement that Israel was just to invade after October 7th? Cenk, you agreed with that. Dennis, you obviously agreed with that. I agree with that. Dave, are you in agreement that that was a just...
I would say, like Cenk, it depends on what you mean by
what
invade.
followed.
Sure.
But the
What you did
initial
with that.
invasion itself, you could see that from a just point, that that would have been justified based on October 7th, based on had they conducted themselves. There was a way that Israel could have conducted itself that you would have felt comfortable with that as a reaction to October 7th. Is that accurate?
Well, I mean, look, if you're spending your opening asking me a question, it's a fairly complex question, but I would certainly say that Israel was more than justified in pursuing and killing anybody who was involved in October 7th.
Why don't we cut the questions there? Continue with your opening statement. We'll get to
Well,
that.
I think that's very important, because then we can narrow the scope of the debate. It doesn't have to be about whether the war is just, but whether Israel's behavior since invading was just, and the way that it has carried it out. And I think the answer to that...
Let me pause for a second, because I have a problem with the vocabulary that's being used. How do you invade a place that you already occupy? How are you invading Gaza if you already occupy the area and the people? So I think the vocabulary that's used is very important, because when you say that word invade, it makes it seem like Gaza is its own separate thing and that Israel has no control over it, when in fact Israel does have control over it.
It is very clearly yes, because first of all, the measures that Israel has taken, obviously we look at the destruction and it is horrifying. We see these children, we see women, we see people being impacted in the most horrific way, and it looks horrible. But the reality is that war is horrible. And the thing that we have to determine is Israel engaged in a war or in war crimes? Right? Is Israel engaged in a justified response to a heinous attack, or is it going and doing things that are beyond the pale? And the evidence seems to suggest that Israel is not only behaving in a way that every other army has behaved in a very similar situation, but in a much more careful way, despite the massive destruction. And
Let me pause here for a second. So you have to understand that has already been debunked. Multiple people have already reported that they have never seen this type of devastation in any other conflict of what they've seen in Gaza. Doctors have come forward and said about the devastation they've seen in Gaza. They said it is like no other. When you try to remove all the hospitals so that the people who are injured cannot be treated, when you get rid of the academic institutions, when you kill over 100 journalists, when they're killing elderly people, when they're killing killing babies and saying the babies are also Hamas. When you have the video footage of the IDF soldiers saying we have to get rid of all of them because they're animals and there is no such thing as a civilian. What are you talking about, Batya? You guys know people like Batya, people like Barry Weiss, people like Jerry Seinfeld, Hakeem Jeffries, Richie Torres. These people are doing this and they're saying these statements because that is what they're paid to do. There's no way you can sit there, Batya, and see all of those children that have been killed. And I told you, I think the number is way higher than 30,000 people if you count the people that are buried under the rubble. There's no way you can sit there and say that that is a just response compared to what happened to the Israelis that were at the festival on October 7th, which some of them were killed by the IDF. Even Israel themselves had to confirm that. So there's no way you cannot make that comparison.
The evidence for that is in the efforts that they have made, the millions and millions of phone calls they make. You understand that Israel telegraphs to the enemy before every single thing that it does in Gaza. They're literally giving away the plan in order to get civilians out of harm's way. Now,
lies. First of all, when you heard from the civilians, and even on CNN, they talked about this, number of the civilians said they had no warning. A number of civilians said on the news that when they were told to evacuate, when they got to the evacuation exits, Israel was bombing those too. So stop it, Batya. Stop it.
Can more be done? More can always be done. But have they gone further than any army in human history? The answer is yes. The number 33,000. Last week, Hamas put out a statement on Telegram in which they said they cannot account for 11,000 of those. So Hamas itself reduced the number to 22,000, which means that if you take the number of Hamas soldiers who have been killed, right? Israel says 13,000. Hamas itself in February admitted to 6,000. We're talking about a ratio of combatants to non-combatants that, again, simply has not been seen in urban warfare. All of these things, I think, come together to suggest that despite the enormous devastation, and I'm with you on that emotionally, we have to analyze this objectively and conclude that if you are saying 33,000 as the number of dead, you are mourning the butchers. And I think that's shameful. I think it's really important that people who are mourning the civilians make sure that they are careful, that they are not mourning exactly what we all have agreed on, which is that the butchers, Israel had every right, not just every right, but a moral right and a moral obligation to kill them.
Got it. Thank you.
So I guess people shouldn't mourn the dead IDF members either, Batya, right? And I don't think that Batya's numbers are correct either. These people are paid to preach propaganda. Why do you see this woman pop up everywhere to talk about this issue since October 7th? Why do you see her face popping up everywhere to talk about this issue ever since October 7th? Propagandists. Got to get out there and push the Zionist narrative.
Thank you, Batya. Dave, you can go ahead. Comedian, and he's host of the Part of the Problem podcast. Go ahead, Dave.
Sure. Well, since we have a short opening here, I think I'll just respond to a couple things that I've heard you guys say so far. So one of the things that I notice almost in every war is that it kind of drives people down to this most base collectivist understanding of what's going on here. You know, this side is bad, this side is good, and no one really sees the nuance that there are individuals involved. So, for example, in the war between Ukraine and Russia, you see people who have the Ukrainian flag in their Twitter bio, and they celebrate when there's a Russian defeat, never really considering the fact that many of these Russian young boys were conscripted into this army, and that they're victims too. And, you know, when Mr. Prager says one side wants peace and the other side wants to kill all of these people, it's a very convenient collectivist way to look at things, but the objective reality of the situation here is that there have been atrocities on both sides committed against the other side. This is true throughout the history of the existence of Israel. This is true before the existence of the state of Israel, with the Zionist settlers, the British, the Arabs. There were atrocities committed on all sides. And to say that everybody, as if, or to imply that everybody on the Israeli side just wants peace, and everybody on the Palestinian side just wants, that is just not true. There are
the atrocities are not, they're not anywhere near the same, though. We went through the numbers on this show multiple times. When you look at the numbers, you look at the deaths, you look at the unemployment rate, you look at all of these different factors. The Palestinians have had way more atrocities than the Israelis have had. The numbers aren't anywhere near close at all, at all. So when people say there are atrocities on both sides, break down what those atrocities are and make sure you explain to people how significantly different those numbers are. Because we're talking about, you look at 2022 and it may say that, 100 Israelis had been killed. But then the comparison, when you compare it to the Palestinians in Gaza, is like 4,000, 5,000. The numbers are nowhere near close. So it's obvious, which is to be expected, when you have one side that is in a position of power and the other side is the position of being occupied. So obviously it is going to be that way.
Lots of Palestinians who just want peace, and there are lots of Israelis who want their land and are quite willing and will openly, explicitly say they're willing to do whatever it takes to take their land. Now, to your point about how, you said every single strike they're warned. No, that is just not true. That's objectively not true. They do warn sometimes, but then that also leads to the question of, does that mean that whatever you do is just okay? The reality is that this is not just a war like any other war. And that doesn't mean other wars are justified necessarily, but there's a very big difference in this war compared to almost any other war we could think of. And the major difference that I see is that Israel has dominated the Palestinian people since at least 1967, and we could probably go back before that. Let me just say this. If we look at things in not a collectivist way, and we recognize that there are individuals, and these individuals make up different groups. Let's say we have the group that is Hamas, made up of individuals, but that's Hamas. Within that group, we have the militant Hamas, and we have the political arm of Hamas. They are different. We also have Israel, which is made up of its citizens. We have different political parties within Israel. Okay, let's take this one group for a second, the innocent Palestinians. I hope both of you would concede that such a group does exist. There are some people on the pro-Israel side who will explicitly tell you that that group does not exist. I think if we're being honest with ourselves, there is no group that has been more victimized than the innocent Palestinians. And at a certain point, maybe we ought to think about that group. Nobody has been through it worse than that group, the innocent Palestinians. And at a certain point, I think the question needs to be asked, does Israel have a right to do what it's been doing to the innocent Palestinians for many, many decades now?
Let's pause here for a second so I can answer that question. Obviously, no, they do not have the right to do what they have been doing. I just want to show you the numbers, because that part there, and we'll come back to that in just a second, that part there from Dave, I really want to show you the difference with the numbers, because when you say there are atrocities on both sides, I'm sorry, but when it comes to this particular conflict, let me pull this up here. In particular, again, I mean, this is going back to 2008. Okay. So death is red. Injuries are red. Blue are deaths. Let me zoom out just a second so you can see it a little bit better. So you can see the difference here. The Palestinian side is on the left. The Israeli side is on the right. This is going through the years. 2008, you can see 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. Who has higher numbers here, folks? We're talking about 2014, over 19,000 Palestinians, over 2,000 Israelis. 2015, 2016, 2017. We come to 2018, over 31,000 Palestinians compared to 130 Israelis. So you can see the difference. So yes, Israel has suffered almost nearly nowhere near. So red is injuries and blue is deaths. You can see it here. Total deaths from 2008 to 2020. This is just to 2020. Over 5,590 Palestinians, 251 Israelis. And that's just to 2020. So you can see the difference. It's nowhere near the same. Nowhere near. Let's bring this back up.
Thank you guys very much. You all stayed within the time limit, which is actually incredible. And Batya, you did steal a little bit of my thunder because, and I'm big glad that you answered that question. Dave and Cenk both responded in that way about how exactly what the question and the superimposed upon that is that do we agree that Israel at least either had a right or was justified in taking some action as a result of October 7th? So my question, I think, to both of you, and both of you can feel free to chime in after both of them has responded, is if we look at the original statements for the war and for the invasion, is that the Israeli military was supposed to accomplish a few objectives. Number one, they had to destroy Hamas, the militant terrorist organization. Two, they had to lead to the release of the hostages. And three, they had to make sure that an October 7th could never happen again. So in the conduct of the war so far, do you believe that they have been successful with those objectives? Dennis, why don't you go ahead and go first?
None of us knows yet. Israel is being prevented by much of the world, and I feel.
Pause. First of all, none of us knows yet. Yes, we do know. Has Israel rescued the hostages? No? Okay, that was one of the missions they were supposed to do. Israel has been, what do you say, blocked or something by the rest of the world? Did anybody stop giving Israel weapons? The U.S. government is still giving Israel weapons. Germany, I think, is after us, number two, giving them a lot of weapons. Who blocked Israel when they're still killing people? Yes, there was the hearing at the ICJ, but the ICJ absolutely has no power to enforce. You got the UN Security Council. You have the U.S. representative raising their hand to veto every time they get to go around. We're the ones holding it up. They're not blocked by the world. It doesn't matter if all these other countries at the UN Security Council vote against Israel. If one of the most powerful countries, which is the United States, and that's the one that's given them most of the weapons, is still voting in support of Israel. Prager. These are the kind of things. It drives me crazy. It drives me crazy. This is propaganda being fed 101. And I don't know. Maybe they need to stop doing these debates. I'm honestly wondering about this. The number of time I've seen these debates on Piers Morgan's show and now this debate, now I'm starting to wonder, are these debates actually helping? Are they doing more harm? Are they spreading more propaganda? I don't know. You guys can let me know in the chat.
That on this entire issue, I'm living in a make-believe world. Every analogy could have been applied to Nazi Germany. There were innocent Germans who were killed by the Allies in the bombing and in invasions and so on. No one denies that. But to point out that there were innocent Germans while the Nazis were in charge is a morally idiotic point. It means nothing. It only means that every innocent German's life that was taken is the responsibility of the Nazis. Every innocent Palestinian life that has been taken is the responsibility of Hamas or Hezbollah. That's it. The analogy is perfect. There is one difference between Hamas and the Nazis. And I never called any group in my 40 years of radio Nazi. I never called an individual that other than the Nazis of the 1940s.
Who is the one that's calling for ethnic cleansing? That is Israel. Who's the one calling the Palestinian people animals? That's Israel. Okay, but he's calling Hamas, he's comparing them to Nazi Germany? What? This goes back to, again, who is in the position of power? We always have to bring it back to that question. And what you'll see is obviously the Palestinian people are not in a position of power. If you go back to Nazi Germany, the Nazis were in a position of power. So how can you compare Hamas to Nazi Germany when they're not in a position of power? You can easily debunk this guy. Easily.
But there is only one difference between Hamas and the real Nazis of Germany. The Germans hid their atrocities. Hamas boasts and videos them.
Batya, go ahead.
I think that they have.
The IDF also video records. Okay, so I'm sorry. Who's on TikTok with the videos? Okay, the IDF. Jesus.
I would say destroying Hamas, definitely. They're not going to get every single one, but the idea that Yahya Sinwar will ever breathe open air again seems to me very far-fetched. I think they have driven him underground forever. And, they've cut off the head. And the idea that Hamas will be able to regroup at this point seems to me very unlikely. The release of the hostages, no, they failed on that front. I think they tried. Maybe they could have tried harder. I think, unfortunately, I hate to say this, but I think a lot of them are dead.
If they are, it would be because Israel was starving the Palestinian people. Because let's keep it real. When they refused to let food go into Gaza, they were refusing to give food to the hostages as well. Don't know what to tell you there, Batya.
There's a lot to say about that, but I think on that they've obviously failed. And as to another October 7th, I think a lot of that has to do with what we're seeing now in terms of the realignment happening in the Middle East, to where you see Saudi Arabia clinging to the idea that they too will be able to join the Abraham Accords at some point. The moderate Sunni and Gulf states rushed to Israel's defense, amazingly, to protect them from these Iranian rockets. And to me, that is, I don't think this is a moral question so much as a strategic one. And I'm sure we're going to get into where does the United States fit into all this? Where do we want the United States to fit into all this? But from that point of view, and Iran-backed October 7th, should it happen again, is going to happen in a very different Middle East, one in which Israel has a lot of support from the Arab nations, and that makes it less likely as well, I believe.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I just feel like people shouldn't have to come in and support and back up Israel when they started a lot of this in the first place. If you're the one out there punching people on the playground, why did the rest of the kids that are swinging on the swings and sliding down the slide, why do they have to come in and help to your defense when you're the one throwing the first punch? Answer that question for me. Answer the question. If you're the kid on the playground throwing the first punch, why do the other kids on the swings, minding their own business, have to come in and rescue you when someone wants to deliver a punch back at you? Not their responsibility. You got yourself into this mess. It's your responsibility to get yourself out of it.
I'm just kind of, I'm blown away by the statement that Mr. Prager just made, that the only difference he can see between the Nazis and Hamas is that the Nazis hid their atrocities. So if that's the only difference you can see, I have a few others that pop to mind. The Nazis were a government. The Nazis had an army. The Nazis had an air force. The Nazis had submarines. The Nazis controlled from France to Poland in all of Europe, whereas Hamas can't even control Gaza effectively.
You see the comparison there? That's a really good point that Dave Smith brought up, is the fact that, again, they have no position of power. Oh, boy.
I find the statement that you can't see any differences between the Nazis killed.
Do you see a moral difference?
Well, okay, but hold on. But you said that wasn't what you said. What you said is that you can't see a difference. The Nazis, okay, but yes, I see a moral difference. The Nazis killed over 10 million people outside of the war conflict, just in terms of people that they killed, let alone the tens of millions of people who you might hold them responsible for. So yes, I do see a moral difference between the two. I'm not saying October 7th was horrifically immoral. But if you're going to say, do you see a moral difference? That would be like if somebody had murdered two people and you went, I see no difference between that and the Nazis. Okay, yes, they're both immoral, but there's enormous differences between the two. Now, to the other point of the idea of, can Israel eliminate Hamas? Even if they were, which I don't think is feasibly possible that they eliminated everybody who is a member of Hamas. I mean, in order to do this, you would have to look at, you know, if the images of Gaza City aren't enough, you would have to look at images 5 times over of that. And this is going to result in just slaughtering innocent people, not to mention the excess mortality where hundreds of thousands of people are going to die as a result of this in the future. But even then, you would just be dealing with another Hamas-like group. Because if you don't understand what creates this problem to begin with, look, this is the problem. This happens all throughout history, all throughout the world. If you want, there's a reason why the Nazis only rose. First, it was after we imposed Versailles. But then, as you know, it was after the Great Depression, when there was hyperinflation, when things go terrible, that's when the worst, most violent extremist groups rise.
Dennis,
and that's what the future is going to be, unfortunately.
Can I respond just very briefly
Sure,
to that?
and then Dennis can go.
Something really staggering has happened in Gaza since October 7th, which is there have been protests against Hamas. For the first time there were protests actually recently in 2019, but they were quashed by Hamas in a very aggressive, violent way. But the people of Gaza, the innocent people of Gaza, yes, who you mentioned, are speaking out against Hamas because Hamas is stealing their food and their aid, and they are seeing, I mean, they've known all along the role Hamas plays in their oppression. But the fact that people...
Pause. So what Batya is doing right now is she's actually trying to deflect. She's trying to put the blame on Hamas for the Palestinian people's oppression. You see how she did that little pivot there? Notice how she did that little pivot? I haven't heard this from anybody who has been to Gaza say this whack rhetoric that this woman just said. The people have started rising up protesting against Hamas. I have not heard one person who has been to Gaza say this rhetoric that this woman just said on this panel. I don't know where she's getting this information from. She probably just made it up. Probably all her Zionist friends like, let's see how we can make this up. Okay, so you mean to tell me people who are starving, people who are eating grass, as someone mentioned in the comments, people who are struggling for food, they got time to rise up and go protest? Get out of here, Batya. Not on this channel. Not on this channel. And another thing, notice how she put the oppression on Hamas. I will say this for the 100th time. Hamas is not in power. It is Israel that is occupying the people in Gaza, not Hamas. It is Israel that controls the resources, the food, what types of food can go into Gaza. They won't even allow them to plant olive trees. You guys know this? You know all the different things that you can do with olives? Let me defend the actual oppressor by actually calling the oppressed the oppressor. Get out of here. It's like the same rhetoric that people would make. Go back during the civil rights movement. Well, you know, the reason why those black people are in that position is because, you know, I mean, they just didn't choose to get better education or do well in school so they can get a good job. That's why they're in that position. Or what you heard in the 90s going forward. Well, they're out there killing each other anyway, and then they wonder why they're poor and why they're struggling. How dare you? I've never seen just so much propaganda spewed in my life. You cannot sit up here and blame the people that are oppressed for their own oppression, Batya. I wonder what some of these people would have been like during the civil rights movement. What would you have been saying, Batya? Would you have gone up to the diner, to the black kids sitting in at the diner doing the sit-ins and say, well, you know, it's your fault, right? What would you have done? What side would you have been on? And the cocky guy, the Prager guy, and her, and all these other clowns out here masquerading like they really care about some human rights. They are Israel first, and that is it. And I don't see a lot of people coming to rush to your defense. I wonder why. That is colonizer mentality. Does everybody understand what she just did? She blamed the oppressed for their own oppression. You can watch the rest of this. I can't even listen to any more of this. You can watch the rest of this on Breaking Points. It's there. You can catch it there. It may be on other channels as well. But that is disgusting to me. That is absolutely disgusting.